dared to stare, unveiling the shadows of fear on fear files.
I remember it like it was yesterday, even though it's been 15 long years. That night, the darkness seemed to swallow everything whole, wrapping its suffocating cloak around our little house. The air felt heavy with unspoken tension as we sat around the dinner table, my parents and me, our utensils clinking against the plates in an eerie symphony of silence. It wasn't the kind of silence you could cut with a knife. It was the kind that weighed down on you, pressing against your chest until you could barely breathe. I glanced nervously between my mother and father, their faces masks of stoicism, their eyes avoiding mine like I was some kind of spectre they didn't dare acknowledge. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, twisting and churning like a storm waiting to break free. But I couldn't put my finger on what it was. Couldn't grasp the elusive truth that hovered just beyond my reach. And then, just when the silence threatened to consume us whole, the shrill ring of the landline shattered the stillness like glass. My parents exchanged a quick, furtive glance before my father rose from his seat, his footsteps heavy as he made his way to the phone. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest like a drumbeat echoing in the darkness. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee from whatever horror awaited on the other end of that line. But I couldn't move, couldn't tear my eyes away from the scene unfolding before me. My father's voice, usually so steady and sure, wavered as he spoke into the receiver. I strained to hear the words, but they were lost in the static crackle that filled the air like a sinister whisper. And then, abruptly, he fell silent, his hand trembling as he held the phone away from his ear. "What is it?" my mother demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. My father didn't answer, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see, something beyond the confines of our little kitchen. And then, slowly, almost reluctantly, he held out the phone to my mother, his expression a mask of fear and disbelief. "It's for you," he said hoarsely. My mother took the phone, her hand shaking as she brought it to her ear. For a long moment, she listened in silence, her face drained of color, her eyes wide with shock. And then, without a word, she hung up the phone, her gaze meeting mine for the first time that night. "We need to talk," she said, her voice hollow and empty. It's been months since that fateful night, months filled with whispered conversations and stolen glances, each one heavy with the weight of the truth we dare not speak aloud. But now, as I stand on the threshold of my parents' bedroom, I can no longer deny the reality of what happened all those years ago. They killed me that night, in cold blood, without a second thought for the daughter they were supposed to love and protect. They buried my body in the woods behind our house, a shallow grave hidden beneath a blanket of fallen leaves and forgotten memories. And then, for 15 long years, they pretended like nothing had ever happened, like I had simply vanished into thin air without a trace. But I'm not gone, not really. I'm here, watching from the shadows, haunting the halls of the house where I once lived and breathed. And now, as my parents sleep soundly in their bed, unaware of the truth that lurks just beyond their grasp, I reach out from beyond the grave to claim the justice I so rightly deserve. I raise my hand, my fingers trembling with a power I never knew I possessed, and dial the familiar number that will seal their fate. And as the phone rings in the darkness, a smile curls upon my lips, cold and unforgiving, a promise of the vengeance that awaits on the other end of the line. For tonight, the truth will be revealed, and my parents will finally pay the price for the sins they committed all those years ago. And as the sun rises on a new day, I will be free, my spirit released from the shackles of the past to soar among the stars, a beacon of justice shining bright in the endless expanse of the night. But until then, I wait, patient and unyielding, a ghost in the machine, a whisper in the wind, a memory of a life cut short by the hands of those who were supposed to love me most. And as the darkness falls once more, I know that my time has finally come, and that justice will be served no matter the cost.
It all started innocently enough. A few weeks ago, I found myself drowning in the monotony of everyday life, suffocating under the weight of responsibilities and expectations. So, like any rational person seeking solace, I decided to embark on a solo trip, hoping to find some semblance of peace in the quiet solitude of a secluded villa nestled deep in the countryside. The villa, with its imposing facade and sprawling grounds, seemed like the perfect escape from the chaos of the world outside. As I settled into my temporary home away from home, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me like a heavy shroud. But I chalked it up to nerves, the inevitable jitters that accompany any solo adventure into the unknown. Days turned into nights, and nights turned into weeks, each passing moment blurring together in a hazy whirlwind of solitude and introspection. I spent my days exploring the surrounding countryside, losing myself in the tranquil beauty of nature's embrace. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness descended upon the land, a creeping sense of dread began to claw its way into the recesses of my mind. It started innocently enough, a casual glance at the dusty old novel sitting on the shelf in the corner of the living room. I picked it up on a whim, drawn to the promise of escape contained within its weathered pages. But as I began to read, my heart quickened in my chest, my fingers trembling as they traced the words that seemed to leap off the page with a life of their own. The story was familiar, too familiar, a chilling echo of the reality I found myself trapped within. The protagonist, a solitary traveler seeking refuge in a secluded villa, only to find himself ensnared in a web of terror and intrigue. And looming in the shadows, a killer, cold and calculating, waiting to strike when least expected. At first, I dismissed it as mere coincidence, a trick of the mind brought on by too many late nights and too little sleep. But as the days wore on and the narrative unfolded with eerie precision, I could no longer deny the chilling truth staring back at me from the pages of the book. The killer was real, and he was lurking in the darkness just beyond the confines of my temporary sanctuary. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind sent shivers down my spine as I waited for the inevitable knock on the door, the telltale sign that my time was running out. I tried to rationalize it away, to convince myself that I was simply letting my imagination run wild in the silence of the night. But deep down, I knew the truth. Knew that I was being hunted like prey in a deadly game of cat and mouse. And then, one fateful night, as the moon hung low in the sky and the shadows danced across the walls like specters in the night, I heard it. A faint rustling sound, barely audible above the pounding of my own heart, followed by the unmistakable click of the latch being lifted from its moorings. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I listened to the steady rhythm of footsteps drawing nearer with each passing moment. And then, without warning, the door swung open with a deafening crash, flooding the room with blinding light and revealing the silhouette of a figure standing in the doorway, his features obscured by the darkness that surrounded him like a cloak. I wanted to scream, to flee from the terror that threatened to consume me whole. But as the figure stepped into the room, his eyes gleaming with malice and madness. I knew that there was no escape from the fate that awaited me in the depths of the night. For the killer had found his prey, and now, as the final chapter of my story ended, I could only pray that my demise would be swift and merciful, a fleeting moment of agony in an eternity of darkness. And as the shadows closed in around me, I closed my eyes and embraced the inevitable, surrendering myself to the chilling embrace of the unknown. For in the end, the truth was far more terrifying than anything I could have ever imagined, a nightmare from which there could be no awakening, a tale of horror and despair destined to echo through the ages until the end of time.
The darkness enveloped me like a suffocating blanket as I emerged from the depths of my lucid dream. The tendrils of sleep still clinging to the edges of my consciousness like cobwebs in the corners of a forgotten room. I blinked groggily, my eyes struggling to adjust to the oppressive gloom that filled the room like an invisible fog, thicker and denser than any darkness I had ever known. For a moment, I lay there in silence, my heart pounding in my chest like a drumbeat echoing in the stillness of the night. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, a gnawing sense of unease that refused to be ignored. But try as I might, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone, that there was something lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce when least expected. I forced myself to sit up, the weight of the darkness pressing down on me like a physical force as I surveyed my surroundings with growing trepidation. But what I saw sent a chill down my spine that froze me to the core, my blood turning to ice in my veins as the truth slowly dawned on me like a waking nightmare. My family was gone. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest, stealing the very breath from my lungs as I struggled to make sense of the empty space that surrounded me. Where had they gone? How had they disappeared without a trace, leaving behind nothing but the echoes of their presence lingering in the air like whispers in the wind? I stumbled to my feet, my limbs trembling with a mixture of fear and confusion as I made my way through the darkness. My hands outstretched before me, like a blind woman searching for salvation in the abyss. But no matter where I turned, no matter how hard I tried, there was no sign of them, no trace of their existence save for the fading memories that dance at the edges of my mind, like ghosts in the mist. And then, as if to mock my desperate search, I stumbled upon the truth hidden in plain sight. A chilling revelation that sent shivers racing down my spine like icy tendrils, creeping ever closer with each passing moment. The doors and windows were boarded up, sealed shut with nails driven deep into the wood, trapping me inside like a rat in a cage with no hope of escape. Panic clawed at the edges of my mind, threatening to consume me whole as I realized the magnitude of my predicament, the sheer impossibility of my situation dawning on me with a sickening sense of dread. I was alone, trapped in a prison of my own making, surrounded by darkness so thick and suffocating that I could barely breathe. And as the truth settled over me like a funeral shroud, I knew that my family was gone, lost to the shadows that lurked in the corners of my mind, their fate sealed by the same darkness that now threatened to consume me. For in the end, the darkness always wins, swallowing everything in its path, until there is nothing left but the echoes of what once was, a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the inevitability of our own demise. And as I stood there in the silence of the night, surrounded by the darkness that had become my only companion, I knew that I would never escape its grasp, that I would be lost to the shadows forevermore, a forgotten soul adrift in a sea of endless night.
Thank you for braving the unknown with us. Until next time, stay haunted.